Hi guys, in this video we will have a look at the Microsoft Azure Web Portal and how to create a virtual machine. So the first thing we need to do is create a Microsoft Azure account, and we just need to Google Microsoft Azure or Azure free account, as I've done here. So I've Googled Azure account, and then if you click the top link here, which takes you to azure.microsoft.com, it will bring you to this tab here. You can then create your free Azure account from here by clicking Start Free, or you can use the pay-as-you-go option as well by clicking Buy Now. The pay-as-you-go option is basically you use the services and you get charged as you use the services. But the Start Free one is a free Azure account, and once you click this you come to the third tab here, and this is where you can create your Azure account from here. But if we go back to the previous tab and scroll a little bit down, you can see which are the free services you get with a free Azure account. So you can see you get 12 months of free popular services. You also get $200 of credit to spend in the first 30 days, so definitely worthwhile getting the free account. And you've also got some free services here as well, which is a good thing. And if we go back to the sign up page or sign in page, you can sign in from here or sign up for an account. So to sign up you need a phone number, a GitHub or a Microsoft account alongside your credit card information. But you're not going to get charged anything if you use your credit card information. It's only for verification purposes, and it's to ensure you're a legitimate person basically. And once your 30 days are over or your $200 spending limit has been reached, you cannot use any of the Azure services anymore. But the good thing is you're not going to get charged with a free Azure account unless you convert it to a pay-as-you-go account or subscription based account. So it's all good to use your credit card information. You won't get charged from Microsoft Azure for giving them your credit card information for when you sign up for a new account. I've already got an Azure account, so I'll be logging straight into the portal. This is the Azure Web Portal, and I'm logged in with my account, so it brings me to the Azure homepage, and it will do the same for you once you sign up for an account and log in. What we will do is have a look at the web portal and how it all works, and we'll start at the very top with the search function here. So starting at the top we have a search function, which is very useful to search for what you want basically. For example, if you want to search for a virtual machine, you can type virtual machine, just like this. And you can see lots of other options as well, like virtual network, virtual cluster, everything else. So it's a really useful option, and it's actually more commonly used than hovering through the left hand side menu. And we can search for other resources as well. So if we type database, it will show us the different type of databases used or available within Azure. Or if we wanted to monitor our services, we can type monitor, and it will show us our monitoring utilities within Azure as well. So that's the search function, and it's very useful. Next is the Cloud Shell, which is this little icon here, this little square icon with a caret sign and an underscore. So on the right of the search function we have this icon which allows us to use the CLI basically. The Cloud Shell enables us to use the CLI. Within Cloud Shell we can use the Bash CLI, which is great for the Linux users, or we can use the Microsoft Powershell CLI. And if I click on it, it will start up the CLI, or start the CLI options. And it gives me a notice about storage. So it says you've got no storage mounted. You need storage mounted to be able to use the CLI. So it will create me a storage account. This will create a new storage account for you, and this will incur monthly cost. And you can view the prices for me as well. I will just create my storage account from here and use my default subscription. And once that's done, it will log you into Cloud Shell. So it's logged me in by default to PowerShell. And what we can do from here, we can change the options. So if you want to use the Bash, you can change it from here. So we just need to click it here and it will log us in. So switch to Bash in Cloud Shell, and I'll click confirm here. So now it's switched to Bash Shell, and I can use my usual Linux commands. So do my ls and pwd, etc. So it's just as if you're using a Linux operating system from here. But if we cross this off, we will have a look at the Web GUI portal. So carrying on from Cloud Shell, next we've got directory and subscription information. The subscription is for billing purposes and trusts the Active Directory services for authentication purposes. And Azure subscription is linked to a single account, the Microsoft or GitHub account, which is the one that was used to create the subscription and is used for billing purposes. And within the subscription, resources can be provisioned as instances of the many Azure products and services. Next to that is notifications. And these are your notifications, which tells you about anything you need to know. For example, the status of your last deployment attempted, etc. And it's giving me a notification of how much credit is remaining on my account. £110 because I'm from the UK, so it's giving me in UK in pounds instead of dollars. And next to the subscription is our settings. So clicking on settings brings us to the settings page. I should say portal and language settings. So these are the settings for our portal and our language settings as well, such as changing which page you can see when you first log into the portal and changing the theme of the portal as well. On the portal settings, you've got all these menus on the left hand side. So you've got overview, directories, appearance, startup views, language and regions, contact information, sign out and notifications. So you can adjust all these as you need to from here. And on the right hand side of the settings, you've got the question mark, which is the help options. So here's where you would get help. You've got the view services health from here. You've got some support resources, ask the Azure community, check the Azure services issues, explore Azure documentation if you need to look at the documentation or resolve any billing issues from here as well. Or you can click on help and support to reach out to Microsoft if you need anything further. And you've also got more Azure resources here, what's new, Azure updates, launch guided tours, keyboard shortcuts and show diagnostics, a little bit more at the bottom here as well. So that's help for us, and on the right hand side of help we've got feedback. So you can feedback anything to Microsoft. It's just a feedback as you get with lots of services nowadays. We'll cross that off. On the right hand side of feedback I've got my account, so here's where I can view my account. I can view the account, switch directory. I've also got a sign in option with a different account, or I can sign out from here as well. Now back to the main GUI portal. On the left hand side here we've got our little 3 lines here, which if we click that shows us all our menu options from here. So these are all our favorites. So these are all what Azure classes as the favorites options, and probably the most common options, the most common items we would access all our resources and services from here. But looking at the home page to start off with, the page we're on now is called the home page, and here we can basically see links to most of the common services and resources most commonly used. So we have our Azure services here at the top alongside here, and we see virtual machines, subscriptions, monitor, advisor, security center, help and support and all resources from here. So it's kind of a shortcut, or you can even create a resource as well separately from here. So all these you can see on the left hand side as well here, but it's just a shortcut to get to them a bit quicker. And then we've got our recent resources as well, and recent resources are basically the resources you've been working with recently. So I've created a CentOS virtual machine, so I can see it here, which is the recent resource I've created. And then we've got navigate if we want to navigate to subscriptions, resource groups, all resources, or the dashboard as well. So again, some more shortcuts, and we've also got tools here as well. So there's various tools such as Microsoft Learn, Azure Monitor, Security Center, Cost Management. It's quite repetitive because a lot of these are in the Azure services here as well. So it's kind of feels like it's just a way to populate the homepage with lots of links. You've also got useful links at the bottom here. You've got technical documentation, Azure migration tools, which can be quite useful if you're migrating physical services to Azure. Azure services, find an Azure expert, recent Azure updates, and quick start center. So that's your home page. If we click on the left here, we can have a look at the left hand side menu. And the first one is to create a resource. And here we can create all kinds of resources. So the most common ones are Windows servers, Ubuntu servers, web apps, SQL databases, Funcion apps, and so on. And we can see these all the way down here. And if none of the common ones are the ones you're looking for, you've also got the categories on the left hand side here. So if we go to developer tools, we can see Chef and Developer Starter, AI platform. We can see GitHub in here. So some quite common tools. And if we go to, let's say, DevOps, we've got Ansible Tower in here, over here as well. And if we go to the one that I'm more familiar with, which is networking, We see networking resources in here, such as the web application firewall that you might need in front of your websites. And I can also see VMware NSX Advanced Load Balancer as well from AVI Networks. And if we hover back to the top here, we can also search the marketplace from here as well. So we can search for something like Cisco and see what comes up. And we can see lots of the Cisco resources here. Or we can click search Fortinet. Or anything for that matter, VMware. So it's really good, and we can also click on see more in marketplace to take us directly there. So if I click that, we'll go into the marketplace. And here's the marketplace, so you can see lots of services in here, and you can also do a search for it as well from here. So if we go back to home page, the next is a home option here, which is the page we're already on. So the next page after that is dashboard. The dashboard is the next one where you can customize it to your preference and create other dashboards as well. If you right click somewhere in an empty area and click on edit, you can basically add things to the dashboard like resource groups, metric charts and so on. I don't have much configured, so I can't show you much, but basically when you are using a lot of Azure services, you can fill this up with lots of useful information such as metric charts, resource groups, all resources clock, markdown, user and groups, user signing summary, and all these as well. So lots of useful information, and you can create multiple dashboards. Let's click on done customizing, and let's go back onto the left hand side menu here. Let's have a look at all services next. And within services, we can find our services. This could be a resource itself, like a virtual machine or a particular service, such as a virtual network or a public IP address. We've got the featured services here, so you can see lots of them here, and you can click on all services as well from here. We can see categories on the left hand side as well, so lots of categories of services here. So we can click on them, general ones, compute, network, storage, web. You can see lots of useful services within them. Mobile, containers, databases, and all these here as well. And going back to the left hand side menu, the next one down is all resources under favorites. If we click on all resources here, and this section lists all my resources I've created within Azure. Once you create a virtual machine, most of these services are created with the virtual machine. For example, the VM needs a network interface. It needs to be associated with a network, so a virtual network is created as well. And we can see all of these here. So we've got the CentOS OS, CentOS IP, CentOS Network Security Group, and all of these as well. A network interface card here. We can see the type of resource as well. So virtual machine, public IP address, network security group, a virtual network, network interface, a disk, storage account, network watcher for monitoring. So we can see these here, resource groups, what resource groups they belong in. Resource group is just to group all your resources together into a logical container. We'll talk about this very shortly. And then location, where I have located these, which region I have installed these in. So UK South for me. I've got this by default, it was created in West Europe. And then what subscription I've assigned these to. So I've assigned these to my default subscription. I've only got one subscription, so it's all assigned to the default one. So it's great to see all your resources from one single page, and you can search for these here as well, and you've got lots of other options here as well. I'm sure once you start using Azure, you'll have lots of resources. This is just from a single virtual machine. I've created all these. And to come out of the resource page and look at the left hand side menu, the next one down is actually resource groups. Resource groups are your resources grouped together into a logical container, and they provide a common management point for the resources belonging to the group. And it's good to group the resources together, because then the resources can be created, managed, monitored and deleted together as one lump sum. For example, a website may have lots of VMs to support its presentation application database tiers, load balancers to balance the load across the VMs, storage to store the content, and then it may have web application firewalls and firewalls to secure the traffic, and other resources to support it. And all of these resources will usually be put into the same resource group. Then you can monitor the whole resource group and review how much it's costing you from a billing perspective, or if you no longer need the website as it was purely for testing purposes or something, then you can delete the whole resource group so everything is managed together. And looking at mine, I've got a CentOS resource group. I've got 3 resource groups here. The CentOS resource group, CentOS-RG, is the one I've created to put all my CentOS resources within here, and we can see all of them here on the right hand side here. Going back to the left hand side of the menu, scrolling down, the next one is App Services. And with Azure App Services is a fully managed web hosting service for putting together things like web apps, mobile apps and RESTful APIs. And with web apps you can deploy web applications such as .NET, Java, Node.js, PHP and Python and so on, and you've got specific Windows web apps and Linux web apps as well. We can deploy mobile applications for the use of mobile specific features with Azure, and you can use APIs to deploy apps with as well. And looking at the next one down the list is Funcion apps. With the Funcion app you can directly implement blocks of codes called functions. It basically provides a platform for serverless code. You can run event-triggered code without having to explicitly provision or manage infrastructure. So you can write some code in JavaScript, for example, and you don't need a virtual machine to host this on as it's serverless. So you can just copy your code and paste it in using the Azure Web GUI. And looking at an example, or looking at something very briefly, we can click Create. And you would choose your subscription resource group, you would give it an app name, then you can publish it as a code or a Docker container and so on. So there's lots of options, and then there's lots of pages as well you can go through with lots of different options for hosting, monitoring, tags, review and create. I will be going through creating a virtual machine, which is very similar to this, very shortly anyway. So we'll have a look at these kind of options when we get to the virtual machine option on the left hand side menu. Let's look at SQL databases next. I'm going to scan over the database services quite quickly. So here we can create an SQL database, which is a fully managed database service. The next option here is also another type of database called Azure Cosmos Database. And Azure Cosmos DB is a fully managed NoSQL database for application development. And so we create that from here by clicking Create here. But the main part of this demo was to have a look at virtual machines and go through creating a virtual machine and all of the options that come with it. So let's create a virtual machine by clicking the virtual machine option here. So you can see I've already got a CentOS virtual machine created, and virtual machines is the big one because it's probably the most commonly used service within Azure. And from here is where we create our virtual machine. We've already got a CentOS virtual machine within here which has been created. We can amend the virtual machine configuration as well, including adding, removing NIC, amending the storage, configuring the networking, such as the inbound and outbound rules. We can do things with security groups and load balancing. We can set up the virtual machine replication. We can configure the size of the VMs and just about everything you need to do with the management and creation of a virtual machine. You can also resize your virtual machine from here as well to a bigger or smaller virtual machine if you needed that after it's been created. But there is a very brief outage when you do this, so you have to be aware of that. And also virtual machines must be stopped when adding new interface cards, so that's another one to be aware of. Anyway, let's create a virtual machine and go through the options on how to create one. So the first thing we would do is click Create here. Then I will click on Create Virtual Machine. I will click on Virtual Machine. So we come to the Create a Virtual Machine page. At the top we have our menu items here, which creates the different areas of the virtual machine, which basically are basic, disk, networking, management, advanced, tags, and review and create. So starting with the basic page, we first choose our subscription and resource group from here to create the virtual machine in. Let's go with my default subscription, which is already selected, and we will create a new resource group by clicking Create New from here, and we will give it a name of New RG. New-RG for new resource group. Then we'll click OK. By the way, you also want to have a look at or hover over the I, as it's really useful and gives you information on that particular option. So it's really useful when you are first learning Microsoft Azure, and it can give you some really good pointers on things as well. Next we'll give it a virtual machine name from here, within here, virtual machine name here, and I'm going to call it Ansible Ubuntu, because that's what I will be playing with in the next few weeks. I'll just spell that right, Ansible Ubuntu. And again, it's important you read the information here as well for the VM, because it basically tells you here where you cannot change the name once it has been given. and about the VM name being used as a virtual machine name in the portal and the host name, so good to understand the purpose of how the name is used. Now from here we pick a region. I've already got UK South selected, which is the one that I want to use. So I'm good with that. We will move on to availability options next. Let's have a look at the options in here. In here we can choose availability zones or availability sets, where we are providing some fault tolerance for the virtual machine. With availability zones we can deploy in multiple data centers within a region, providing redundant power cooling and networking. And with availability sets, it uses the same data center but using isolated racks, power and networking to provide fault tolerance within the data center itself. So that's the differences between availability zones and availability sets. Availability zones is using multiple data centers, and availability set is using the single data center but using different physical resources within the data center. Next, let's have a look at image. So we can select the image from here. If we click on here and have a look at the images, and at the bottom we can see all images, so you can select that if you don't see your images here, but I can see mine, Ubuntu server 2004 LTS generation 1. I want this one, so I'll select that. Hovering down the page we've got more options, and the next one is size. So we can basically pick the size of the VM, and you can click on all sizes as well here to see the other sizes and options as well from here. So I will click the drop down from here. In fact, let's select all sizes to see all sizes. It will take me to the all sizes page. The best one for me selected, which is basically the cheapest one. As you can see from the resources, it's using all the least resources. One virtual CPU, half a gig of RAM, and it's the cheapest one, £3.21 per month. That will do. So we will select this button here, or we can just hover down. I can show you that there's lots of other virtual machines. There's categories of virtual machines for the more serious virtual machine users here. Let's scroll back up and click on select here, and we can see our virtual machine is has been selected here, which brings us to authentication type next. And for authentication you can use a standard username and password or an SSH key, so you can select them between here. I will use a standard username and password, so I'll select password here, and I will give it a username and a password. Once that's done, we've got the next section, which is inbound rules, inbound port rules, and this is for access over the internet to common ports such as HTTP, HTTPS and SSH. We can see them here. And in a real environment you would want to lock this down as much as you can to permit it from a specific source address unless it was a publicly accessible service. So we will choose not to allow any ports. Let's select none on this occasion, but we can see at the bottom if we choose any ports it will be open to anyone, and this should be locked down. Right, so we've completed filling out the basic page. We can click the disks as the next page, or we can select it from here right at the bottom. Next, disks. Let's have a look at the disks options. And at the top we can see it says the size of the VM determines the type of storage you can use and the number of data disks allowed, so you need to bear that in mind. The first option we come to is OS disk types, and if we have a look at the options in here, I can see standard hard disk drive being the cheapest, and it is used for least critical stuff. Then we have the standard SSD in here, which is the one in the middle for when you want some disk reliability. And finally we've got the premium SSD, which is best for sensitive workloads, and we can also click on more information. So if we click on standard HDD, I will select the cheapest option, and if we hover over the I, we've got learn more about managed disk types here, so we can learn more about the disk types and the options in here. But we'll move on to the next option, which is encryption type. And we have some encryption types to choose from here, with the default being encryption at rest with a platform managed key. Then the option for encryption at rest with a customer managed key, which means you can use your own keys basically. You can either import your RSA keys to your key vault, or you can generate new RSA keys in Azure Key Vault. And finally, double encryption at the bottom here with platform managed and customer managed keys. But we will stick to the default one here, the top one. And move on to data disks. which is the last option in disks. And here we have the option to add and configure disks basically. So we get two options. One is create and attach a new disk, and another option, attach a existing disk as well. So these are for additional disks. We do not need to do anything here. And we finally got an advanced section at the bottom here as well. So if we scroll down, you've got some advanced options in here. I've never really played about with these options. I know the use managed disk option, where you would have the option to specify whether you would use a managed disk or an unmanaged disk. Managed disks provide much better functionality, but there are certain use cases where you may want the disk to be unmanaged, such as you can choose the disk size when provisioning, and the performance and other features as well can vary between them. Unmanaged disks seem to have a bit more flexibility. Let's move on to networking next by clicking networking. So here we first create our or configure our virtual network, create our virtual network. A virtual network is similar to a physical network where you can configure subnets, routing tables, gateways and so on, like you would for a physical network. And we would need to create one for our virtual machine. So you can create a new one or pick an existing one. We will create a new one from here, and I will call it Ubuntu-VNet. Like that. And then we can specify our address space here as well, our subnet details here as well. Let's just click OK just to create it and see what happens. So it's created my new virtual network here. Next is subnet. It's already selected one for me, which is 10.1.1.0/24. Just a subnet, IP subnet like you would get in a physical environment. So you can create a subnet as you would in a physical network. We will leave it as the default one here. Then you've got the public IP here. You can assign a public IP from here, which is a good idea if you want to access the VM from home. And there's already one specified for me in here by default. Or we can create a new one from here, but I'll leave it as it is. It's a new one here, so I'll have a new public IP address assigned to this virtual machine. Next is the network security group options, and we've got three options: none, basic and advanced. And we can configure our network connectivity to or from our virtual machine, for example allowing RDP to our virtual machine. And there's a basic and advanced option when you are configuring network security groups, with the advanced option just being more granular. Next we've got public inbound ports, and the two options is, one is none, not to configure it at all, or the other option is to allow specific ports. But I'll leave it as none, not to allow any selected ports. And let's hover down, and right at the bottom we've got load balancing, which is our last option, which is where we can put our virtual machine or machines behind a load balancer. And this is if we want to load balance traffic to our website, for example, or even if it's a load balancer for any other type of service, so our back-end database servers, for example. We'll leave the load balancer unselected, we don't need one, and we will move on to the next option, which is management. And within the management page we have management, monitoring and security for our VMs. So the first one is the Azure Security Center here, which basically tells you about Azure Security Center, and you can learn more from here as well, which is all about security posture and protection against threats. You can turn on monitoring as well from here. You've got different monitoring options here. You've got identity as well, which is set up identity, such as using Azure Active Directory to log in with. And finally at the bottom there is automatic shutdown options here, and if you want to apply backups, enable backups for your virtual machines. And right at the bottom, guest OS updates is basically how you would want to apply patches to your operating systems from here as well. Let's select next and go to the advanced page next. With the advanced page, let's scroll to the top, and from here you can basically add configuration, agents, scripts or applications via virtual machine extensions or cloud init. You can select an extension to install by clicking here, and here are the ones available to us. Obviously these change depending on the operating system image you select on the basic page. So you can choose your extensions you want to select, you want to install from here. And we've got things like backup extensions, monitoring extensions and so on. Let's go back to the virtual machine page. Let's cross this off. And at the bottom here in custom data, under custom data and cloud init, you can basically pass a cloud init script or a configuration file into the virtual machine. So you're basically injecting a script when Azure is provisioning the VM. It may be just some parameters such as your account details or the hostname of the VM, etc. So it's just a way to automate the VM a bit more using scripts. Let's move on to tags. And tags is a way for you to provide your own identification to a resource or resource group, which is great for billing purposes. To give you an example of using tags, you might have lots of subscriptions, lots of services. Let's say you have 100 services. Let's say you have 100 servers, and let's say we have 50 CentOS servers within the environment. And what if you wanted to view all your CentOS servers to check how much they are costing us per month? Well, you can search for them by tags, since we now have tagged them with a label of CentOS. So you can create a label. So if we create a label, let's call it OS for operating system, and then let's give it a value of CentOS. And now we can search for our tags, since we have now tagged them with a label of CentOS. So as you build all your servers, you can apply the same tag to them, and then you can use that tag for when you want to look for all your CentOS servers and to see how much they are costing you to run. And this is a great feature, and it even works if they sit in different resource groups or part of a different subscription. So very useful to use tags, so try and use tags as much as possible. Actually, I'll change the name to Ubuntu because it's not CentOS, it's going to be Ubuntu for us. And the last option is review and create. It's self-explanatory, this page, which is just to review your options and create the virtual machine. It validates our configuration and gives a green tick box if all of it looks okay, like it does on the top left here, validation passed. And over here, within terms, we can review our terms and we can review our settings, and then eventually we can click on create to create our virtual machine. And once we click create, it shows us the resources it is creating as part of the virtual machine build, and it shows us their status and eventually whether the deployment exceeded or not, in which it did, and it gives us that feedback as well that the deployment is complete. And finally we can go to the resource here by clicking go to resource. And the one thing I want to do is have a look at the IP address it's been given. So we can see the IP address, the public IP address. So I can try and connect to it from my home laptop. So we've got a IP address here, and what I want to do next is start up PuTTY and try and connect to it. So I've got my PuTTY applications and we will try connect to it. So 20.90.87.150, and I don't expect it to connect because we didn't allow any inbound connections to the virtual machine. So we may need to reconfigure that and make sure it's open for SSH access. So it's got a network error, connection timed out. That's because we've not allowed the port through to the virtual machine, so we will do that next. If we go to networking, any ports within the network security groups. So looking at inbound port rules, we can allow a inbound port on port 22 from here. So let's go with source any, since we are just testing. Source port ranges, leave it as any. Let's specify the port as port 22, TCP, and let's add that. So we can see that now it's been created at the top, and we can see port 22 on TCP is allowed. Let's open up our PuTTY application and try and connect to the NIC public IP address 20.90.87.150. I've got my PuTTY application. I will specify the IP address 20.90.87.150, and we can see it's connected. So I just need to log in. And there you go, job's a good one. I can do all my Linux stuff from here. So that shows how to create a virtual machine and how to connect to the virtual machine. Let's carry on with the demo of the GUI. The next one down the list is load balancers. So here's where we create load balancers, and just to give you an overview of what a load balancer is, it's used when you have a number of servers that are used to serve the same request. So for example, if you have a web server hosting your website, But because the web server is now running at maximum resource, as it's hit by lots of requests, you can add another web server, and then you add a load balancer in front of it to load balance the requests. So it will send one request to one web server, and then it will send the second request to the other web server. So they're sharing 50% of the resource utilization now. So that's web servers for you, that's load balancers for you. Let's move on, and the next option in the GUI is storage accounts. This is where we would create our storage accounts for use. And you need storage accounts to store things such as files and folders. There are a few types of storage services depending on what you need them for. The most common one, which has a funny name, but it's called blob storage, and it's used for storing lots of unstructured data such as images, documents, streaming video and audio, and so on. Then you've got disk storage as well. Disk storage is for the virtual machines. You can't use Azure Disk Storage to store a disk outside of the virtual machine, however, it's just used for the VMs. You've also got file storage. File storage provides fully managed file shares in the cloud, and you can access the file storage share using standard protocols such as SMB, and you can mount them just as you would with any local network share onto your local laptop as well. You've also got table storage. Table storage provides a NoSQL data store for key value pairs using large scale data sets. Then you've got Azure Queue Storage. Azure Queue Storage provides asynchronous message queuing for communication between application components. So as you can see, there's a lot to Azure Storage, and I'll be doing a separate video on this. Let's move on to the next item, which is virtual networks. And we've already covered virtual networks actually. We've already created one called Ubuntu-VNet. Just to go over it again, a virtual network is just like a physical network. You're able to configure subnets, routing tables, gateways like you would on a physical network and connect your resources to them. So that's what they're there for. Let's move on and let's look at the next one, which is Azure Active Directory. The Azure Active Directory provides identity and access management, and the Azure AD is just like the on-premise AD domain services, but it's in the cloud. And you can create and manage users and groups, and you can configure permissions, and you can also join machines. You can also sync your on-premise AD to Azure AD using a tool called AD Connect. Let's move on to Monitor. We can use Azure Monitor to monitor our services, and when clicking it, it brings you to the Get Started page. But you can also see on the left we've got the What's New page as well, which shows us all the enhancements features as well. If we scroll down, we can see them all and we can read them all from here. We can also see on the right hand side of Get Started page tutorials and demos as well, and it's great because we've got some quick start options here. So learn how to collect data from Azure VMs, Linux computers, Windows computers, Azure Kubernetes, Dockers and Windows containers. You can learn how to monitor things such as web apps, cloud services, Docker apps, Azure Functions, Service Fabric apps, and learn how to onboard all these as well, ASP.NET apps from Visual Studio, Node.js, etc. here. You've also got some tutorials down here to get the bigger picture, find and fix specific problems, optimize your applications, and then there's courses that Azure offers here. And at the bottom we've got some trials, Azure Log Analytics, Azure Application Insights Analytics, and some videos as well you can watch. But going back to the Get Started page, we can see at the bottom here the different types of monitoring services such as monitor and visualize metrics. And this is a feature that collects numeric data from monitored resources into a time series database. And then we've got query and analyze logs. These are used for troubleshooting and visualization, basically looking at the daily operation of resources such as creating and deleting virtual machines. So we can do that from here. And then we've got setup, alerts and actions. You can set up alerts and actions based on the triggers from the metrics or the logs. So when you want to know about something that has hit a maximum value or it's not working as it should be, you can set those alerts up and actions up from here. Going down the menu page again, we've got Advisor next. And Azure Advisor provides recommendations of how we can use Azure to make the most out of it. It identifies unused or underutilized resources and recommends removing resources that we have not been using. This really helps with configuring your resources to match your actual workload. If we look on the left or in the middle, we can see they have recommendations based on cost, security, reliability, operational excellence, performance, and we've got tips and tricks at the bottom as well. So it provides advice on all of these categories, so it's a really good feature to use. Looking on the menu again and moving down, we're getting near the bottom now, Security Center. And with Security Center, It provides visibility of the security posture across all services. And with Security Center, you can monitor on-premise and cloud workloads. It can apply security settings to new resources. It can provide security recommendations on your current configuration, resources and networks. It can identify potential vulnerabilities as well, and it has other capabilities as well. Looking at the menu again, looking down, we've got cost management and billing. And from the name it may be self-explanatory. So cost management and billing is everything about managing your costs and checking how much you have spent. It helps you understand your Azure bill, monitor and control your spending, manage your account and subscriptions, and optimize your resource usage. And a common recommendation with Azure Cost Management and Billing and Azure Advisor is the recommendation to resize or shut down a VM. Basically, if Azure has detected that a VM is underutilized or it's just been idle for a long time, it will just recommend to shut it down or resize it. So it's very good for managing your costs. Let's go down the menu, and the very last one is help and support. And help and support is another self-explanatory one. First, you've got these get started guides, billing, frequently asked questions, documentations and support plans. Then you've got the community if you need to reach out to the community, and if you're still struggling, you've got recent support requests. So you can create a support request from here, or you can choose the right support plan if you don't have a support plan as well. And at the bottom here you've got see all support requests if you've got lots of support requests open. And that's pretty much it. So we've covered all the menu items within the Azure Web GUI. So going back to the home page, although we have gone through everything on the GUI interface, we've only just scratched the surface, as Azure does so many things and offers so many software applications from their partner vendors, and there are other things as well like containers and functions and many other resources as well. You can build your own cloud data center environment. But I'll be doing lots of other videos to drill down into lots of Azure features in the coming months, so keep an eye out for that. And thanks for watching. Thanks guys.